The tray hit the tile like a gunshot, splattering milk and sushi across a floor polished so bright you could check your heartbreak in it. A crutch, his crutch, rose into the air like a trophy, and someone whispered careful, limp as if caution could slice skin. Phones went up in red-eyed rows, hungry. Before we begin, if this kind of story reaches you, share where you're reading from. It's always powerful to see how far courage can travel. Enjoy the story. Chapter 1. Stars Don't Care How Fast You Walk. E.J. Whitmore learned early that humiliation was a sound before it was a feeling. It was the hiss of sneakers behind him, the staccato of laughter that wasn't with him. It was the clack of his forearm crutch against stone floors, a metronome for every stair. At 10, he had already buried more than many grown men are asked to carry. His mother, Clara, left the world as quietly as she moved through it, her devotion folded into bedtime stories and lullabies that smelled like jasmine tea. The last night, she traced constellations on his ceiling with the glow of a tiny flashlight, whispering, "The stars don't care how fast you walk, Edge. They shine for you anyway." He repeated it until the words didn't fit in his mouth anymore, whisper worn, frayed like the edge of his favorite blanket, something you keep anyway because letting go would unmake you. Crestwood Academy didn't care about stars, it cared about polish. Tesla doors sighed at drop-off like a tired king. Gold-lettered names lined gymnasium walls. Kids swiped cards for sushi and milkshakes under industrial skylights that poured in a kind of cold, curated summer. EJ could buy 100 lunches for 100 kids. He couldn't buy an ordinary walk. Crippled Prince, billionaire baby. Does daddy's money carry you too? He hated that one most. Money could build an elevator, a wing, an entire school. It couldn't soften the way concrete sneered under your feet when your gait was different. It couldn't stitch the gap between a son and a father who lived in the same penthouse and only met between departure and return. Richard Whitmore, CEO whose name appeared in glossy magazines with words like visionary and ruthless, loved his son in the abstract the way men love legacy. His love wore suits, it smelled like boardrooms, it kept time with jet schedules and deal closings. There were nights he meant to be home for dinner and discovered he was 3,000 miles away and 6 hours late. "Promise me tomorrow," EJ would say. And because Richard had learned to command tomorrow, he thought he could promise it. Absence leaves its own kind of bruise, a transparent one that sinks beneath the skin. So EJ moved through Crestwood's gleam with a practiced smallness. He learned the side doors. He perfected the downcast gaze that made you almost invisible if you were also very rich. He ate alone. He shaped his shoulders to absorb passing grazes that were not accidents. He learned to turn his crutch into a shield without letting it become a wall. On Tuesday mornings, he met with a physical therapist who told him progress couldn't be measured by speed but by stubbornness. "You keep showing up," she said. That's the fight. He did keep showing up. He just didn't know yet that one day someone else would. Chapter 2. The Code and the Ghost Across Town, on a block where storefronts traded tenants with the seasons and buses wheezed like asthmatics. A narrow dojo sat with its blinds crooked and its floor cracked in a patience that only old wood knows. Inside, Amara Johnson moved through forms like prayer. Her father, Master Anthony Johnson, coined his belt with sweat and kindness, both permanent. He'd believed the dojo was more than a place to learn to throw a man. It was where you learned to carry one if the world dropped him. Protect the weak, never throw the first punch, never fight for ego. He did not say the words as rules so much as invitation. He said them until they hummed in Amara's marrow. Then the heart attack came like a thief. One moment the room was loud with his laughter, that big, easy sound that made your shoulders unclench. The next, it was just the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft scrape of Amara's small feet as she ran to him. The ambulance carried him away with the kind of efficiency that doesn't deliver miracles. The dojo exhaled and never quite inhaled again. Amara was 10 when the world hung a black belt of grief across her shoulders. Her mother, Ivan, pressed 2 jobs into the space where a man used to stand. Nights at the hospital, days she didn't afford to sleep. Their apartment inched around them, furniture rearranged to make room for bills. The shoes Amara wore had seen someone else's winter. Her backpack's zipper stalled like a breath you couldn't catch. At Crestwood, her scholarship was a key that opened a gilded door and a spotlight that wouldn't turn off. Charity girl. Smells like broke. They said it softly because they were smart. They said it loudly because they didn't know what a held-back hand could do. Amara trained alone in the cracked dojo, bowing to a ghost before each practice. Each stance wasn't just a stance, it was a conversation. Her father corrected her elbow. She adjusted. He tapped her fists until they unfurled. Because strength isn't about proving you can hurt someone. It's knowing you don't have to. Amara didn't rush. She learned that breath was a weapon softer than pride. She learned that being underestimated was cover you could use. When the world made her invisible, she used it to see. Chapter 3. The kingdom of buffed floors. Crestwood's halls gleamed like a promise made to donors. Lockers were whisper quiet. The gym floor carried the names of families whose fortunes underwrote the pep rallies. Under the fluorescence, Rolexes flashed like a language. Wealth was armor. It made you bulletproof if you wore it right. Jason Miller wore it right and wrong, which is to say he wore it like a crown. His father's name was stitched into the basketball court, and the city's memory. His mother's pearls had never once snagged on a zipper because such things didn't happen to Millers. Jason's laugh was an instrument other kids tuned themselves to. Connor Hale and Bryce Turner moved behind him like gravity. Phones shadowed them. In the cafeteria, kids learned to keep theirs ready. Moments were content, and content was more valuable than conscience. The crowd's moral compass swung to the strongest magnet. On Friday, the room buzzed with the end-of-week exhale. Trays clattered. Steam rose off pizza slices in a tired cheer. EJ found a corner table and balanced his tray with care. Amara sat alone at the far table, chopsticks holding a bite of cold noodles in a pause. She watched without looking like she watched, the way animals in forests clock the movement that could mean danger. Jason's shadow fell over Edge's table, and everyone with a phone got a better grip. "Oh, look," Jason said, his voice too loud, the way people wear cologne when they want to announce themselves before arriving. "Prince EJ. Need help holding that tray." Connor's fingers twitched greedily at Edge's crutch. Bryce adjusted his camera angle. Edge's mother's words were a whisper at his ear. "The stars don't care how fast you walk." He let himself breathe. The shove wasn't hard enough to hospitalize. It was just hard enough to humiliate. The tray went down. Milk burst in a white arc and painted EJ like war. The room loved it. Laughter rolled across tables like water, covering everything. The chant started in the back, "Fight, fight, fight." It wasn't a request. It was a cue. "Careful, Limp," Connor said, smiling, as if he were offering a helpful note in a meeting. He yanked the crutch up, raised it high, a lighthouse for cruelty. "Who wants it?" Phones lifted higher. Screens glowed red. 100 lenses latched onto a boy trying very hard not to fall apart because he had fallen apart enough. At the far table, Amara set down her chopsticks. The clack they made was small and certain. She stood, tucked a stray braid behind her ear, and began to walk. She didn't push through bodies. The bodies moved around her. Control has a gravity. It's subtle. It doesn't splash. It pulls. Jason noticed her because he always noticed the possibility of an audience expanding. "Well, look who it is," he smirked. "Charity girl, you his bodyguard." Amara didn't answer. She sidled past him, stooped and picked up Edge's tray, wiped the spilled juice with a napkin, uprighted his chair. The silence that fell wasn't respect yet. It was confusion. She handed EJ the chair with both hands like it was a ceremony. Their eyes met. His were two different storms. She nodded once as if saying, "I see you." He breathed like he'd forgotten he could. Jason pushed again because boys like Jason only know one lever. EJ staggered, arms windmilling, and the cafeteria inhaled collectively, anticipating a collapse. He didn't collapse because Amara was there, one hand on his shoulder firm, the other adjusting the chair into his path. "Stand," she said gently. He did. "You want to fight?" Jason crowed, heat blooming in his neck. He cocked his arm back, a punch heavy with show. In the screen's frame, it looked inevitable. Amara stepped aside. It was beautiful, which is a terrible word when pain is present, but that's what it was, fluid, precise. Jason's fist cut air and found nothing. His momentum betrayed him, as momentum does when it's built on arrogance. Amara pivoted, palm to his forearm, weight low, redirecting instead of resisting, and Jason sailed hard into the edge of Edge's table with a breath-knocking thud. The room lost its script. Someone swore softly. Someone else lowered their phone as if their own thumb had betrayed them. The chant lost its vowels. Connor moved because a king dethroned makes his knight stupid. He swung his leg, a sloppy kick aimed not even at Amara but at Edge's ribs. He wasn't thinking tactical. He was thinking spectacle. Amara saw the foot and the boy behind it. She caught the heel near her hip with a soft slap, twisted outward, and harnessed his own weight like wind in a sail. Connor flipped, legs momentarily above his head, and landed on his back with a thunder that rattled trays on adjacent tables. Silence was a species that had gone extinct in Crestwood's cafeteria. It suddenly returned, grazing. Amara did not smile. She did not sneer. She placed Edge's crutch back into the shape of his hand, aligned his fingers like she'd been born knowing where strength lives in another person's palm. "Stand tall," she whispered. EJ recalled his mother's ceiling constellations, all those white pinholes in black. He straightened. He looked up and discovered the ceiling had never held him, only the idea that he should stare at it. Jason stumbled to his feet, cheeks flushed, betrayal burning at his edges. He lunged again because turning around is a choreography some boys never learn. His fist came, and Amara's body transformed into what her father had made, a hinge, a gate, a definite maybe. She pivoted, guided his wrist past his own centerline, introduced his shoulder to the tile without malice. He lay there thinking for the first time in a long time. "Did you see that?" someone whispered, awe cracking like an egg. "She didn't even hit them," another said. The sentence traveled like water seeking low places. Control, not combat, precision, not rage. Connor came again because embarrassment will make a boy chase a wall. Amara caught his wrist, rotated his forearm, pressed his shoulder toward the ground with a pressure that told him more than words, "You can stop now." He did. The doors burst open. Vice Principal Sinclair's heels announced her verdict before she did. "You," she said, pointing at Amara as if selecting a tile to remove from a mosaic. "Suspended, effective immediately." 100 heads turned toward injustice like sunflowers toward light. "What?" someone near the front scoffed. "That's not. No violence is acceptable," Sinclair said, voice clipped. Period. Jasmine, a junior with braids and a habit of holding her phone high for truth, took 2 steps forward. Her hands trembled, but bravery doesn't check if it's shaking. "With respect," she said, "you didn't see enough." She airplayed the video to the smartboard as if she'd been born to do it. In the room, they watched themselves watching. Jason's shove, Edge's stumble. Connor's kick, Amara's redirections, beautiful and almost boring in their efficiency. When a thing is right in the body, it doesn't look dramatic. It looks obvious. Vice Principal Sinclair's face went red like an apology trying not to be born. She opened her mouth, closed it. Her authority fluttered in the air like a sheet out of a window. "We didn't fight for ego," Amara said, voice level. "We didn't throw the first punch. We only stood when we had to." Something broke open then. Not the tables, not the phones. The crowd. A cheer rose from somewhere deep, from kids who had eaten in corners, kids who had learned to make themselves unremarkable to stay alive. The cheer wasn't for violence, it was for recognition. For a truth finally bigger than a laugh. Jason, still panting on the ground, said, "This isn't over," because he didn't know yet how to exist offstage. Edge, standing tall with his crutch aligned under his hand like a third leg, said, "Yes, it is." And the room remembered there was a boy here who had learned to speak quietly. They heard him. Justice, justice, justice. The word spread like a pulse. Chapter 4. Viral isn't always a sickness. By 2 o'clock, the clip had more views than the school's last 3 pep rally videos combined. By 6, Amara's name trended locally. By 9, it climbed a national list no one at Crestwood knew how to interpret. The caption on one mashup said, "She didn't swing. She stood." That line ate its way through an internet hungry for stories where decency doesn't lose. Another account dug up an old photo of a man in a frayed gi, Master Anthony Johnson, his arm around a younger Amara with a white belt tied in a bow like a gift. A local news anchor, voice soft with nostalgia, said, "Many in Detroit remember Johnson's dojo, a sanctuary where kids learned to breathe through their fists." Not all the attention was kind. The cruel corners of the web do what they do. But the algorithm, baffling, brilliant, barbaric, fed this story to more people who needed it than to those who would chew it up. A mother in Phoenix texted her kid the clip with a dozen crying emojis. A boy in Chicago's screen recorded it and learned the pivot in his living room. A kid at Crestwood rewatched the moment Amara realigned Edge's hand 5 times and cried the 5th time because it looked like love. On the 48th floor of a penthouse that drowned in signal and deadlines, Richard Whitmore stared at his phone long enough for his assistant to knock, hesitant. He had been reading the same email sentence for 10 minutes. He swiped the notification open because something in the frozen frame grabbed his throat. A crutch in the air. His son's small body braced against ridicule. A girl stepping into the frame with her sleeves rolled and her heart steady. He pressed play. He watched the tray, the shove, the chant, the saving pivot. He felt heat in his chest and wasn't sure if it was fury or shame. He watched Amara return the crutch like she was returning someone's name. He watched his son grow taller by 2 inches without moving an inch. He replayed Clara's voice uninvited. The stars don't care how fast you walk, Edge. They shine for you anyway. Richard paused the video and saw himself reflected in his phone's glass, a man accustomed to command, staring at a moment he had nothing to do with that might save his son. For the first time in months, he didn't know what to do. He did know what not to do: send a lawyer, issue a statement, turn this into brand management. Proud of you, he typed to EJ, I'm here, on my way. He sent it before he could edit it into something corporate. To his assistant, cancel the 300. Reschedule the board, I'm going to Crestwood. He rode through traffic with his phone dark and in his lap like a silent apology. When the car stopped, he didn't know how to enter a school without an entourage. He tried it anyway. Chapter 5, Reckoning in polished light. The next morning, the cafeteria became a courtroom, and everyone learned they were witnesses. Principal Harrington stood at a portable podium under an exit sign that no one used. Yesterday's incident has received, he paused, almost smirking at the understatement, widespread attention. Teachers clustered at the edges, faces schooled into neutrality and then breaking into human and then neutral again. Parents slid in like fog. Money hung off wrists and necks and names. Jason and Connor stood to one side, their swagger gone, replaced by that loose stiffness humans have when they've been told to stand up straight. Bryce lurked behind them, eyes down. Harrington cleared his throat. Video evidence has made the truth clear. The altercation was not initiated by Amara Johnson or Elijah Whitmore. They acted in defense with restraint. The applause began tentatively and then started running, crossing aisles, jumping tables. Teachers clapped too. Phones rose to document justice because that's the world we live in. Jason, Harrington continued. Connor. Jason's father, a man whose handshake had built houses and erased rivals, placed his palm between his son's shoulder blades and gave gently the first push to a better place. Jason's voice came out like a car starting in winter. I'm sorry, he said. He looked at EJ, then Amara. We shouldn't have mocked you. We shouldn't have touched you. We were wrong. Connor's jaw worked like he was chewing humble pie. We embarrassed ourselves, he said. It wasn't eloquent, but it was true. Amara stood. Her presence trimmed words down to their bones. Don't just apologize to us, she said into a room that actually listened. Apologize to everyone you made small while you were trying to feel big. Jason turned, faced the cafeteria, and the apology grew teeth. I'm sorry, he said, louder. To everyone, Connor followed, because sometimes leadership can be born in an admission. The applause this time was messier, wetter. It contained relief, the kind that leaks out when someone finally names the thing. Richard stepped into the doorway and stayed there a moment, using the pause to learn. He saw his son, taller by spirit, a crutch that looked less like an omen, more like a tool. He saw the girl who had placed it back where it belonged. He saw kids filming. He understood. This was their pen and paper. He saw one boy, Jason, stripped of borrowed power and maybe ready to find his own. He waited for the applause to ebb. Then he raised a hand, uncertain. Harley-Davidson confidence isn't required to lead. Sometimes you can enter on foot. I'm Richard Whitmore, he said, and a ripple went through the adults that didn't touch the students. He didn't launch into gratitude. He turned to Amara instead, the microphone still in his hand. May I speak to you? Her chin lifted, unafraid. He was a billionaire. She was a child. He was a father. She was the person who had held his son up when he had not. They were exactly equal, and everyone could see it. He walked to her so she wouldn't have to walk to him. Thank you, he said, quiet enough to require the room to lean in, thanks that didn't wobble into theatrics. You saw my son. She measured him with a glance that took in his suit, his shoes, his eyes. He was right there, she said. All I did was make room for him. Richard swallowed something tight. You did more. He turned, took the mic properly, and faced the school. I have given Crestwood a lot of money, he began, and some adults relaxed because this sounded like familiar territory. I was going to give more. There were nods, knowing ones. I am not today. You could feel donors shift in their seats like someone had lodged a pebble under a heel. He held up a palm calmly. Not because this school doesn't deserve support, but because support has to match courage. He gestured to Amara, whose posture was its own speech. Yesterday, a student used training, restraint, and bravery to protect another student. She did what this school is supposed to teach, what all our kids are supposed to be learning. But she learned it in a cracked-floor dojo across town that shut its doors when her father died. Murmur murmured. Some recognized the name. A history teacher pressed her hands together, a prayer of gratitude for someone saying the thing out loud. My next move, Richard said, and something electric raced across the room, is this: we will be reopening the Anthony Johnson Dojo as a community center. We will fund it fully: scholarships, uniforms, adaptive training equipment, free classes for kids who can't pay, counselors, tutors, a fridge stocked with actual food. The board of that center will be made up of families from the neighborhood it serves, including Miss Johnson and her mother, and the name on the door will be his, not mine. Someone dropped a pen. A girl near the front started to cry. Principal Harrington's jaw went slack and then set with purpose. Richard wasn't finished. We will also be funding a program here, if the administration accepts, with one condition. No new wing with my name on it. Instead, you put resources into what holds kids up, training for teachers in de-escalation, counselors with time enough to actually counsel, and a policy that bans the crowding, filming, and cheering of cruelty. You'll figure out how. I'm offering to pay for it. If bystanders want to be safe, they need tools to be brave. The shock was double. He was withdrawing a vanity gift and offering something less visible and more transformative. The parents who had memorized gala seating charts didn't know what to clap for. The students knew exactly what needed applauding, and they gave it. And personally, he added, turning back to Amara, if you're willing, I would like to ask your permission to learn in your dojo. My son and I both. Silence fell heavy for a heartbeat, and then cracked in astonished laughter and claps that weren't about mockery. A billionaire asking a 13-year-old girl if she'd teach him to fall. Amara looked at him, the way you look at someone the first day they tell the truth after months of lies. You can come, she said, but you don't get special treatment. Good, he answered. He meant it. Chapter 6, the work of repair. The reopening of the dojo was a procession of hammers and hope. The cracked floor got sanded down and varnished, but not so much that the history left it. Photos of Master Johnson returned to the walls, frames repaired but a little crooked here and there because life keeps its corners. A mural bloomed on the building's brick, a girl pivoting with open hands, a boy standing tall with a crutch planted like a flag. At the first class, the mats rolled out new and green like spring. Kids took their shoes off at the door and lined them up in sizes that told stories. Amara tied belts with the same care she tied her own at 8. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Richard came in a plain t-shirt and pants that didn't know what a boardroom looked like. He was awkward in the way adults are when they first realize that their bodies are not their minds. He bowed at the door because Amara had placed the sign there, respect starts before you enter. EJ moved toward the mat with the measured gait of his best days. Amara had ordered adaptive equipment, grab bars installed along one wall, padding thicker in corners, a second, lighter crutch that would allow him to practice moving low without losing balance. Her father had taught her to teach with eyes and hands, not just words. What if I fall? EJ asked. You will, she said. Everyone does. We learn to do it right. She showed him how to let his body give instead of resist. The first time he toppled, he laughed, and the sound startled him. Falling could be funny. The idea astonished him. He looked at his father, who hovered too close for dignity. You too, Amara said to Richard without turning. Her voice carried just enough to be heard by someone who needed to be told. On the mat, he obeyed. Money can buy a lot, but it can't purchase the humility required to listen to a child. He learned to roll poorly. He learned to fall loudly. He learned to get back up, red-faced, grinning despite himself. Jason stood in the doorway 3 weeks later. He wore shame like a stiff sweater. He didn't enter, just watched, fingers twisting at the hem of a hoodie that wasn't designer. Amara saw him, but she wasn't in the business of rescue. She was in the business of welcome. "Shoes off," she called. "Phone in the basket, bow at the door." He obeyed. He bowed. He stepped onto the mat and for once in his life was just a kid in a line trying to learn where to put his feet. Connor came 2 days after, eyes shifting, and then Bryce with the look of someone who had filmed a stain and was trying to scrub it with action. Jasmine joined too, because her brave had started with a phone and could end with a stance. She filmed the class one day with permission, posting a clip where kids learned how to redirect a shove without vengeance. The caption read, "Discipline over spectacle." Ivan, Amara's mother, sat near the front desk with a ledger and a new tablet, both given by someone who understood that sustainable programs needed more than paint. She wore scrubs and a smile she had earned the hard way. Between class rotations, she wrote to donors who weren't Whitmores but were just as important, neighbors with $10, a grandmother with a checkbook and neat handwriting. Crestwood grew a spine in the meantime. The policy shifted, phones in sleeves during lunch, to be used if you needed help, not if you wanted views. The school brought in trainers, Amara among them, to teach staff and students de-escalation, not from a corporate course with glossy slides but from a room with mats and proof. Principal Harrington made a point of standing in the cafeteria during the busiest shifts, sleeves rolled. Vice Principal Sinclair apologized to Amara in person, the kind that had room for an "I was wrong" in it. It didn't erase, it built. At night, in a penthouse that had once been a museum of absence, EJ and Richard learned something you can't schedule. Presence is not just being in a room. It's being in it without your phone face up like a shimmering excuse. They sat and ate dinner. Sometimes it was takeout. Sometimes it was eggs on toast. Sometimes it was quiet. They printed assignments and glued them to poster board together like an old-fashioned cliché, because clichés are often just truths we've forgotten how to say. One night, on their balcony that held the city like glitter in a jar, EJ reached for his father's hand without thinking. The skyline blinked. The stars twitched. "Mom said they'd shine for me anyway," he said. "They do," Richard said, meaning it now, "but I was supposed to show you how to see them." Chapter 7, breaking the script the day the dojo held its dedication, the street filled with neighbors and suit wearers in strange solidarity. The ribbon was red, but not for drama. It was red because Master Johnson's first belt had been white with a red stripe, the one that told a kid, "You're ready to learn more." Richard stepped to the side of the makeshift stage, conscious that his shadow was a thing he could choose to shrink. He spoke only to say what money had done, purchased mats, hired counselors, paid for light and heat, and what it hadn't and couldn't taught. Amara did that. Anthony Johnson still did that. A reporter asked how much he'd given, the number, always the number. He said, "Enough to start." Not enough to finish. The community will finish it. The reporter didn't know where to put that in a segment. Another asked if he was renaming any Crestwood building in exchange for his new donation there. He said, "No names, just people with resources doing their jobs." The PTA most enthusiastic gala planner aged 3 years in a moment, and then smiled, because maybe this could be better than embossed invitations. Then the twist no one expected. Richard announced he was taking a leave from the CEO seat for 6 months, not a retirement, not an abdication. He would still advise, but he would not be in the office 20 hours a day. He would be on a mat in a classroom by a boy's bed reading from a book about stars. Some said it was a stunt. Some said it wouldn't last. Both might have been true or not. The point wasn't permanence. It was a man admitting that the foundation under his life was new cement and needed curing. Later, when the crowd had dwindled and the mats smelled like sweat and lemon cleaner, kids lined up to demonstrate for their parents. Amara stood at the front. "Remember," she said, "we don't show off. We show our control." EJ stepped forward. Jason faced him, hands up, palms open to show respect. Amara nodded. "Slow," she said. They moved through the pivot they had practiced, a gentle redirection, a stumble caught and contained. When they finished, they bowed to each other. "Stand tall," Amara said, almost to herself. It had become a refrain in the dojo, but never a slogan. The kids said it to themselves on bad mornings. Jasmine filmed with permission again, this time to share with a caption that built instead of burned, "We protect each other here." Bryce turned his phone off and joined a younger kid on the sidelines, tying a belt that wouldn't knot properly. Connor cleaned up spilled water without being asked, a small life sentence he gave himself every class without complaint. They would not be saints. They would make mistakes. They would also help put away mats, because repair is a muscle. Ivan watched her daughter's shoulders move through a kata and saw her husband there, the way he held his spine straight when the world asked him to bend in the wrong places. She cried and didn't hide it. The dojo didn't pretend to be a church. It was simply holy the way a room is when purpose fills it. Chapter 8, the night everything was quiet, time didn't fix everything. It rubbed certain edges smooth. It revealed where the splinters were. There were days Edge's leg hurt so loud it drowned everything. There were days Amara's grief stung like an untied knot. There were days Richard missed what the other side of his life demanded and wondered if he'd thrown a small grenade into his own empire. On a winter afternoon when darkness came early, they closed the dojo with brooms and laughter. The kids filed out in pairs, chattering about a test and a game and a grandmother's tea. The mural outside glowed slightly under a streetlight. Snow threatened. "Coach," Jason said. "Amara did not call herself sensei. She wasn't ready to wear titles yet. Can I stay after?" "My little brother, he gets jumpy when kids stand too close. Can you show me how to help him with that?" Amara's yes was half nod, half smile. "Bring him," she said. "We'll teach him the circle of safe." Jason did bring him the next week, a tiny boy with big eyes who tried everything and didn't like the sound of the mat squeaking. They adjusted the sound, the speed, the expectations. It was nothing like redemption arcs in movies. It was better. When all the lights were off and only the exit sign hummed, Amara stood in the doorway and bowed to the empty. "For you," she whispered. The air answered with warm quiet. Richard and EJ walked home under a sky crisp with points. "Dad," EJ said, "do you think Mom can see us?" "Yes," Richard said, not because he knew, but because it felt right to believe. "And I think she likes what she sees." They stopped on the balcony. The city's noise was a far ocean. Above, the stars did what they had always done on nights both good and bad. They refused to be concerned with pace, with gait, with titles. They burned for anyone who bothered to look up. EJ gripped the balcony rail, knuckles relaxed, shoulders square. He felt the echo of Amara's fingers in the adjustments she'd made to his palm and the weight of his crutch when she returned it, not as pity but as permission. He felt his father standing next to him, present, phone dark. He felt 1,000 cameras from that day turned off finally. "I didn't fight," EJ said. "No," Richard said. "You stood, and so did she." "Yes," Richard answered. "She taught the rest of us how." In a school built for power and a dojo built for presence, the lesson spread, not like a virus but like warmth. It went home in the rib cages of kids who had been filmed too many times not of their own choosing. It lived in the thumbs of those who hit record and then learned how to hit stop. It settled on the shoulders of a man who had treated love like a calendar entry and discovered it was more like a mat you roll out every day. They had mocked a boy for his limp. They had sneered at a girl for being quiet. They had believed cruelty ran the room. But when momentum met discipline, when spectacle met restraint, when a crowd saw a hand steady on a shoulder, something older and better took the microphone. EJ went inside, slept like someone who had fallen well and often. Richard lingered, looked up until his neck hurt. The stars didn't care how fast he had walked all these years. They shone anyway. He finally knew what to do with that light, share it. Not by naming wings after himself, not by holding press conferences about kindness, but by showing up and letting a girl with braids and a black belt of grief teach him where to put his hands. Coda, what shock looks like months later, another lunch erupted, not with a shove, but with a loud voice cutting through. A freshman tripped. A red tray went spinning. Heads turned by reflex. Phones twitched. Then, from a table in the back, 3 kids stood up in sequence, Jasmine, Connor, and Jason. "You good?" Connor asked, his voice without edge. The freshman nodded, cheeks hot. Jason picked up the tray, set it right. Jasmine smiled, not with her mouth, with her eyes. No one recorded. They didn't need to. That afternoon, Mr. Harrington posted a note by the doors. "We've all been trained into escalation. Ask us for help before you need it. Signed, every adult in the building." In the dojo that evening, Amara taped a poster to the wall, a simple design Jasmine had made, 2 open hands, a crutch, and the words, "Stand tall." It wasn't a brand, it was a reminder. People went back to their lives. Money continued to confuse. Power continued to talk. But in a corner of a city at the edge of a winter that would be long, a ribbon-worn belt and a girl's calm voice kept telling a truth old as fighting and newer than trend. Strength isn't about proving you can hurt someone. It's knowing you don't have to. And when you have to stand, not for ego but for the person next to you, stand tall. The shock wasn't that a billionaire gave money. It wasn't even that he took a leave. The real shock was that he let a story unfurl without grabbing it, and then used his weight not to make himself look bigger but to make room, wide, clean, steady, for courage to step through and teach. And it did. It always does when given space.